Okay, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all, and very many thanks for the organizers, Taiwan EPA and ITRI, for inviting the International Energy Agency to come and speak to you today. Can you all hear me? Okay, good, thank you. So I will give you a talk on the IEA CCS roadmap, role and the next steps for CCS. All right, we will continue. You see on the screen actually a picture, which is the cover picture of our carbon capture and storage roadmap of 2013, and you may notice a familiar picture here if you follow CCS developments. This is the main picture on the right hand side. There is the installation of a big steel cap on the absorber tower at the Boundary Dam power station CCS project in Saskatchewan, Canada, and I think it's wanted to put that on the cover of our roadmap to illustrate that CCS is not just some form of pipe dream or theory, but it's actually practice. We have projects that are being built as we speak today, and that will start operating during this year. Also in the power sector, we've been missing these larger projects. So that's that by way of introduction. Now, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek type news portal news from the Onion, which quoted a couple of months back that the new report finds that climate change is caused by 7 billion key individuals. And I think I want to put this up just to remind ourselves that often we talk about, when we discuss climate change, we think of it as being something that someone else is producing and something that large corporations somewhere are producing, but it's got nothing to do with ourselves. Well, that's not always entirely correct either. We all are happy to produce byproducts that are made in industrial companies, and therefore we're all in this game together very much. Now, the outline of my talk is first around CCS technologies, how we think that they exist. This is not something that requires major breakthroughs to make it work. Secondly, that CCS is really vital for our clean energy future globally. And thirdly, that none of that will really happen without a strong policy commitment. So let's look at the technologies first. This is not going to be a very long section, just a brief outline. So carbon capture and storage, what are we talking about? We're talking about essentially 3 steps in a process. Carbon capture technology will allow us to do 3 things. First, to capture CO2 from various point sources, separated from various types of flue gases, and compress it. Secondly, to transport CO2 through various means, and thirdly, to store it underground in various types of suitable formations, deep underground. On capture, why first of all do we need to capture CO2? Well, we rarely actually emit CO2 in any kind of a pure form. It's usually part in a mixture of different gases. But yet, to store CO2 or to use CO2 for natural recovery, we require very pure CO2. And we have various sources with varying percentages of CO2 present. Gas-fired power stations, relatively low concentrations of flue gas, 3 to 4%, and going all the way up to even higher than 60% sometimes in acid gas flue streams. And the higher the concentration, the higher the pressure, usually the easier it is to capture CO2. But this capture step is is always needed. Four main capture routes, as you very well will know. Post-process capture, where we essentially plug in a capture unit at the end of the production process, can be used in most sectors, especially in the power generation sector, and where we use chemical solvents in rather well-known chemical processes to actually grip the CO2 and then release it, compress it and set it forward. Syngas or hydrogen capture, where essentially we gasify fossil fuels or biomass, provide a syngas, and then remove the CO2 before combusting that remaining hydrogen in a power station, especially suited for IGCC power generation. Oxy-firing, where instead of combusting in normal atmosphere, we combust the fuel in a high oxygen atmosphere, and that results in relatively pure, relatively CO2-rich flue gas. And then a fourth area, which is the inherent separation, such as the one used in gas processing as we speak today, where CO2 separation is an intrinsic part of the production process, where the CO2 needs to be captured from a gas stream for that gas to be marketed later on. All routes relatively well understood, and if we look at the application of CCS in power or industrial sectors, we don't have really clear winners at this stage. I think we need to demonstrate, have several power stations, large industrial installations in practice before we can start to see which ones will perhaps emerge as winners. Transporting CO2, this is very quick. I think this is the most mature part of the process really today. In pipelines, we already have over 6,000 kilometers of CO2 pipeline, especially in North America, and that is established practice. CO2 is piped for thousands of kilometers as we speak every day. Not an issue of technology, or an issue obviously of economics, permitting, routing, and so forth. CO2 can also be transported by ship. Food grade CO2 ships exists, but there's nobody has yet built a large scale CO2 carrier fleet for the sake of carrying captured CO2 for storage purposes. But technologies are known in this area as well. So in transport, really it's not that much about technology, but about cost and which sort of solution suits which project. Storing CO2. Now, four rather well-known options for CO2 storage are displayed on this graphic that the Global CCS Institute has produced. We have various saline formations underground, which can be used for CO2 storage. Formations essentially formed of sandstone, porous rock, where CO2 can be ejected. Unminable coal seams, or used in enhanced coal bed methane recovery. Use of CO2 in enhanced oil recovery, or injection in depleted oil and gas reservoirs. And depths in general are lower beyond 1 kilometer. Perhaps between 1 and 3 kilometers are the figures known from today's various projects and experience. Okay, here we go. If I'm lucky. How do we retain CO2 underground? Well, essentially through four main trapping mechanisms. Structural trapping, which is the perhaps the most important one, where basically the CO2 that is rather more buoyant than the brine, the saline water that it replaces, it migrates upwards and at the end hits a sealing formation through which it can no longer permeate, and that structure traps CO2 in place. Residual phase trapping, where CO2 droplets are basically trapped inside the rock like in a sponge and remain there. Solubility trapping, where CO2 is trapped, where CO2 is dissolved in the brines, in salted water, it's contained in, and obviously in the very long term, the mineral trapping, whereby CO2, by reacting with the rocks around it, forms carbonate minerals and is trapped permanently that way. Following question on CO2 storage then is that do we know that there is enough storage capacity available? Rather than looking at the pictures, exact numbers here, I think this illustrates the various ranges of different types of high-level assessments that have been done over the past years in different parts of the world. And these are numbers in gigatons, and we see that we have dozens to hundreds to even thousands of gigatons of storage capacity that is estimated to be available in different parts of the world. How much do we actually need? I'll come back to that a little bit later on. Contrasting these figures to the actual need, these are very much bigger than what we think we will ever going to be needing. Obviously, the big issue is that these are high-level estimates, and every CO2 storage project will have to actually characterize and find that site and develop it in order to be able to inject and store the CO2. So what is available on high level in estimates is something very different from actually compared with the actual site-specific considerations. Also store CO2 through enhanced oil recovery, which was already mentioned by the representative of the United States. And also this is a well-known, well-established practice, especially in North America, well, kind of near exclusively in North America until now, where CO2 flood in an oil formation can slow the decline in oil production by releasing more oil from the reservoir, and at the same time provide revenue to partly offset the cost of CO2 capture. Now, all those technologies, we know they exist, they're in use as we speak, so apart from some of the cost issues, we don't necessarily require any technological breakthroughs to make CCS happen today. I think it's much more a matter of policy, and I'll discuss some of that a little bit later on. Now, this part of my talk is then relating CCS to the wider energy scenarios. And I start from a concept that we've developed in the IEA over the past couple of years, which is a kind of a very simple metric on carbon intensity of our energy supply. And if you look at the units of energy supplied in the world in the past 40 years, actually, it is the carbon intensity of each unit has actually remained surprisingly stable since the early 70s. So while we have been boosting renewable energies, low carbon energies in various sectors, especially in the past 15 years, at the same time we've also been increasing the use of coal and gas, especially in the past 10 years. So at the end, the average unit of energy supplied in the world is actually as carbon intensive as it was nearly 40 years ago. And this cannot continue. If you look at the green line, vector shapes like this, this is where we think our energy supply should go in a 2-degree world, a 2-degree scenario, if we want to really seriously combat climate change. We just released, actually last Monday, the latest figures in our energy technology perspectives scenario studies, and this is a graph taken from ETP 2014. And what this tells us is that if we're somewhere in the order of 31, 32 gigatons of energy-related CO2 today, if we don't do anything, just assume a business-as-usual world, we'll end up not quite doubling, but nearly doubling our energy-related CO2 emissions per annum to roughly 55 gigatons per year in 2050. So that's if we do nothing. What we think, however, in our 2D scenario, 2-degree scenario, is that we need to basically reduce our emissions by 50%. Energy-related emissions globally in that same time period. So actually push them down to 15 gigatons, which was the level of 1970, 1971. And to do that, and at the same time keep fueling the economies, keep fueling, providing energy to increase populations, increase GDP, and so forth, we're going to have to deploy a number of different technologies. Energy efficiency and renewable energy in our latest calculations occupy by far the biggest position, but CCS is a very critically important technology in our scenarios. It continues to be, and actually the role of CCS has been very consistent in our energy scenario modeling in the past 8 to 10 years. Its share has in the past diminished ever so slightly, but it is still there, and the figure 14% here is an estimate of the total CO2 emission reduction that CCS should be dealing with in that whole portfolio from now until 2050. And if you look at the 2050 figure, the share of CCS increases, and it reaches something like 17 or 18% at the end of this period. So CCS is very much part of the solution for us. Not a silver bullet, not a solution on its own, but definitely critically important. Another trend that we've observed over the past scenario analysis is ever more increasingly important, is that CCS really is not only about power stations, but it is also about many other industries, from refining, hydrogen production, cement, steel, and so forth. In our scenario modeling, this varies rather much according to different regions of the world. But if you look at the global average here, it's actually 50-50. So the share of CCS in industries other than power has actually been increasing during the time that we've been modeling CCS at the IEA. So it's a very strong message also not to forget about the other sectors and not to see CCS only as a power sector solution. If we look at power, if we look at our recent scenarios on how we see the power sector evolve globally, obviously lots of increased share for renewable energy displayed here at the top of the graph, and CCS gaining ground after 2020 very heavily, and we don't see much coal-fired power without CCS being in place after 2045 at all. There will probably be some gas-fired power without CCS, but the rest really is taken up by CCS solutions. So we see it deployed and decarbonizing the power sector very much in the next 4 decades. And globally, the CCS capacity might reach something like 840 gigawatts. So for us, the case for CCS really is quite clear. We have a justification in we can call it sort of energy reality fossil fuels are part of today's energy mix. They supply 80% of our energy today, and even in our 2-degree scenario, they will continue to supply 40% in 2050. So we need to do something about the emissions coming from those fossil fuels, and CCS is in some sectors the only solution. Going back, to an extent we cannot reach targets without it. In sectors other than power, cement, iron, steel, some chemicals, refining, without CCS, no other solutions really exist. And we also think that we can gain an economic advantage by using CCS, because it can save us money. We only want this for the power sector, but keeping the required CO2 reductions and reduction ambition constant, we've taken CCS out of our investment mix, and surprisingly we would need to be investing 40% more if we didn't have CCS in place in the power sector to achieve the same decarbonization level with other industry, with other technologies. So it really can save us money. I'm going to actually skip this because we're going to hear about large-scale projects in the next talk. Just to say that large-scale projects do exist and they are in the pipeline, and we should not lose hope. This is simply to say that if we plot various types of large-scale projects or CCS projects in general over a time period, we see in some industrial sectors, gas processing and refining, we see a number of larger projects emerging. In the power sector also we see development towards larger installations. And then there's a number of other sectors, iron and steel and cement as cases in point where we don't really see much happening, and therefore it's nice to be here in Taiwan, knowing that you have one of the early pilots in the cement sector that we very much look forward to seeing later in the week. Talking about the CCS business case then very quickly. Bloomberg New Energy Finance has estimated that total investment in CCS between 2004 and 2012 has been somewhere in the order of $20 billion. And you can agree or not agree with that figure. It doesn't really, that's not the point here. The point is that at the same time, over $1,600 billion have found their way in other clean, low-carbon energy sources, mostly wind and solar in this case. And I think this is a very simple way to illustrate that a business case for other low-carbon energies has been created by policy, has existed, and therefore there's been lots of investment. And for CCS, we really haven't seen it enough yet, and therefore the investments have been lower. So we have assembling the CCS parts. We still have lots of challenges ahead. There's both economics and policy. We have low or inexistent carbon prices. We have the unvalued benefit of CCS technology learning. It was mentioned that this first mover advantage is very hard to define. Sometimes it doesn't even exist. We might have a second or third mover advantage sometimes when somebody has already tested the technology, but for the first mover it's very hard. In policy we have uncertainty about long-term climate mitigation goals, and consequently we have a lack or limited incentives for CCS. Obviously we still need to work on technology to reduce the cost, but very importantly also work more and more than before on aspects of stakeholders. It was very well mentioned by Minister Wei in the first introduction that every capture technology you can actually at the end of the day buy, but the storage is always going to be local, and those projects always need to have a local solutions, and they need to be accepted locally. And that's an area where a lot of work is still required. Now, where do we think we need to go with CCS? If you remember the wedges chart a few pictures back, and the 14% of CCS, well, this is then translating those 14%, that CCS wedge deployment in our scenarios to a pathway from now to 2050. And so in 2050, we're going to really have to be using CCS routinely across all sectors and be storing between 6 and 7 gigatons of CO2 per year. In 2030, we need to be using CCS routinely in the power sector and in certain other industrial sectors and reach nearly, well, at least 1.5, nearly 2 gigatons of CO2 stored per year. And to get anywhere close there, we really need to get moving during this decade. And our goal that we have put out in our roadmap is that we should have 30 large-scale projects in operation across several sectors globally, and we should be storing 50 million tons of CO2 per year. And that might then get us on the pathway to starting to deploy CCS. The near-term goals are not very easy, but they are still possible. If you look at the numbers today, we don't have any power generation equipped with CCS at the moment. We're going to change that figure hopefully during this year with 2 large projects kicking off in Canada and in the US. We have perhaps in the order of 25 million tons captured from industrial applications, and depending on how you see it, 5 million tons or a bit more than that transported and stored. Whereas in 2020 we should have 4,000 megawatts of power generation equipped with CCS. We should capture CO2 from industrial applications, over 33 million tons of it, and then transport and store by the end of the decade, something like 50 million tons. And but if all the projects that we know today come into operation, we might be able to reach it. So these near-term goals are not easy, but they are still possible. We also put out key actions in our roadmap. I won't go into details of these, but I would highlight the very first one, introducing financial support mechanisms for demonstration and early deployment. This is something that has not really been done by most countries yet. We have had some early demonstration grant funding schemes available, but not many countries have yet seriously thought of actually supporting a second wave of CCS projects with operating incentives and so forth. The United Kingdom is currently putting in place a contract for difference feed-in tariff mechanism for CCS power, which I think is a very useful first example of a deployment incentive mechanism that is going to be driving CCS in the UK and hopefully can be inspirational for other countries too. And various other key actions that we have put out. What we're going to do with these next is that we're going to develop a simple system of measuring progress against these key actions, and then hopefully being able to point to progress and point to areas where further work is needed. Now, the last part of the talk, I wanted to quickly touch upon the point of CCS requiring a strong policy commitment. Because if we don't have a policy commitment, not much CCS will happen, we think. And we want to put the different policy elements in one picture. This is our attempt at doing that. Obviously, it would be good if there was a long-term vision for CCS deployment within a country or a jurisdiction. That's not always the case, but it would help. And that would then translate into various frameworks that will be needed for CCS. Left-hand side, technology, research and development. This is really all those research and development policies and programs that are needed to be in place for the actual development of the technologies. Things that are being done in this institution here and in many places elsewhere. We have demonstration funding and demonstration policy, which is somehow bridging the technology and R&D framework towards the next big block, which is the incentives to actually deploy CCS. So from demonstration, we might, in the next phase, need some sort of targeted deployment incentives that will drive projects forward, and ultimately prices or limits on CO2 emissions. And next to all this, we will need some form of permitting frameworks to ensure that we do CCS in a safe manner, and so that it doesn't harm the rest of the economy or other users of subsurface or natural resources. So that's both efficient resource management and then regulation for safe and effective storage. And in most cases, all these big pieces of the puzzle need to be in place for CCS to move forward. So a few words on each of these. Just by means of R&D, I think in the IEA member countries we've been surveying CCS research and development spending. I think it's quite actually helpful to see that has been on the increase in absolute terms, and also its share in both clean coal and overall energy R&D portfolio has been increasing consistently. Also, the patent activity has been on the increase, which shows that technology developers find this area interesting and find it interesting to develop technology for CO2 capture, transport, and storage. Nothing more on R&D at this stage. Then if we go to the other end, which is the permitting frameworks, here we have a number of different objectives that need to be tackled. These are the effective management of natural resources, because the pore space underground is finite. There's the protection of the local environment, human health and safety, so that actually inject CO2 in places where it doesn't harm people or the communities. What permitting frameworks also need to do is that they need to ensure that safeguards in place that we actually do CCS and CO2 injection for a permanent retention of that stored CO2. And then, to an extent, legalizing some of the aspects of CO2, amending legislation that might, in some circumstances, prohibit CO2 storage. I'll actually take all these here at the same time. The IEA has done some work earlier on legal and regulatory issues. One of the publications we did was called the Model Legal and Regulatory Framework in collaboration with some other organizations, and that basically outlined the various different issues that a permitting framework, storage regulation framework should cover, starting from the regulatory scope and definitions, going to the management of different rights, property rights, competition with other interests using subsurface, then obviously the permitting, site exploration, project development, and the CO2 injection activity itself. How do you ensure that that's done in a proper manner? Aspects of operating, and then further on closing of the storage facilities, whether it is monitoring, reporting, verification, inspections, corrective actions, and so forth. And then the very important area of management of long-term responsibilities and liabilities. That's a very large area of work, and starting from scratch, obviously this is a big, very big undertaking. So I think the first step on this road for any jurisdiction is to assess where and which parts of current existing legislation actually can handle which part of these challenges. We do some tracking of these developments in our legal and regulatory review, and just to highlight that many of the leading jurisdictions, be it in the European Union, Australia, North America, have actually put lots of this in place already, and there's a relatively good legal and regulatory frameworks in place in many countries, and moving elsewhere. For example, some developing countries like South Africa are actually doing the assessments of their regulatory frameworks as we speak. I'll skip these two. This is about the South African assessment project. Since we're out of time, I will skip the incentive policies, and I will just do the conclusions. So, technologies to capture and transport and use store CO2 exist, and many are in use every day. However, the use of these technologies in large scale for the sole purpose of cutting emissions has, however, developed slowly. CCS is, for us, really an integral part of our clean energy future, and in some sectors, alternatives to CCS do not exist. CCS requires a very comprehensive policy commitment, and this ongoing decade where we live now is really critical for kickstarting CCS deployment. And with that, I finish. Thank you very much.